I'll be honest with you. The summer of 2003, I lost 42 tomato plants to late blight in under 2 weeks. I sprayed everything the garden center sold me. $30 copper, $8 neem, a fungicide I won't even name, nothing held it back. I walked across the field to Daniel's place on my old order Amish neighbor half a mile down the road, expecting to see the same wreckage. His tomatoes were untouched, not a brown leaf in sight. He pulled a brown plastic bottle off a shelf in his shed and said, "Bill, this is all I use, about $1 at the feed store." 21 states won't let their extension agents tell you about it because it's not registered as a pesticide for tomatoes. Stick with me to the end. There's a second ingredient Daniel adds to the bottle that nobody talks about. I want to be straight with you about who buried this. It wasn't a person. It wasn't a company. It was a piece of legislation most gardeners have never heard of called FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, passed in 1947 and amended in 1972. Under FIFRA, a state extension agent, in the person you call when your tomatoes start dying, is legally barred from recommending any substance as a fungicide unless that substance carries an EPA registration label for that exact crop and that exact pest. No label, no recommendation, not a suggestion, a legal line. Here's what that means in practice. 3% hydrogen peroxide has never been registered as a fungicide for tomato late blight. Nobody filed for the label. Nobody paid for the trials. So the agent at the county office, even the one who knows it works, cannot put it in a printed handout, cannot say it on a phone call, cannot mention it at a community workshop. 21 states have explicit internal policy memos sitting in their extension office filing cabinets right now spelling that out. I've read excerpts from 3 of them. The language is almost identical. Agents shall not recommend unregistered fungicidal applications, even when peer-reviewed work supports the efficacy, and peer-reviewed work does support it. There's a 2011 paper in the journal Crop Protection that documented hydrogen peroxide knocking down Phytophthora species in controlled trials. The paper's sitting in the academic record. The agent still can't tell you about it. Now let me tell you what that cost me personally. The summer of 2003, I lost 42 tomato plants in 14 days. 42. My wife had planned roughly 600 jars of sauce for the cellar that year. That's how we ate through January, February, March. All of it gone. I called the extension office. The young man on the phone was kind. He recommended what he was allowed to recommend. None of it worked. Meanwhile, half a mile down the road, Daniel, my old order Amish neighbor in the heart of Lancaster County, had a brown plastic bottle on a shed shelf and a garden full of clean tomatoes. Every American gardener who has lost a crop to blight since 1972 lost it in part because the cheapest answer was sitting on a shelf nobody at the county office was allowed to point to. All right, let's get to it. The first layer is the what? The brown bottle on Daniel's shed shelf, and the one he handed me in the summer of 2004, about a year after my disaster, was 3% hydrogen peroxide. That's it, 3%. The same stuff your grandmother kept in the medicine cabinet for scraped knees. The exact stuff. Daniel didn't buy it at the pharmacy, though. He bought it at the feed store on the edge of town in the brown plastic quart bottle that the farm supply has carried for as long as anyone around here can remember. Last time I checked, it was $1.09 a quart. You can buy it at the drugstore, too, in the smaller bottle, but you'll pay 3 or 4 times as much for the same liquid. Daniel buys it by the case at the feed store and never thinks about it again. Now here's the recipe, and I want you to write this down because the dilution matters. 1 tablespoon of 3% hydrogen peroxide per 1 cup of water. That's roughly a 1:16 dilution. If you're using a small hand sprayer, the quart-sized kind you can pick up for $6 or $7 at any hardware store, that's 4 tablespoons per quart. If you're using a backpack sprayer the way I do for a bigger bed, that's 1 cup of 3% peroxide per 1 gallon of water. Mix it fresh. Don't store it mixed. The peroxide loses its punch within a few hours of being diluted, especially if it sits in sunlight. Daniel mixes his bottle the morning he sprays, and whatever's left at the end of the day gets poured on the compost pile. I watched him do this for a full season before I tried it myself. I stood in his garden in 2004, 2 months after the disaster, and I watched him fill that little hand sprayer at the pump. He didn't measure with a measuring spoon. He measured with the cap of the peroxide bottle, which holds almost exactly a tablespoon. He's been doing it that way for so long he doesn't think about it. And that right there is the kind of detail that nobody at the county extension office is allowed to put in a printed handout. Because the moment they put a recipe like that on paper with a quantity and an application instruction for tomato blight, they have crossed the line into recommending an unregistered fungicidal use, so they say nothing. And the gardener goes home empty-handed. All right, let's keep going because the what is only half the picture. The second layer is the why, the mechanism. And once you understand this, you'll understand why 3% peroxide does in 20 minutes what $30 copper can't do in a week. Late blight is caused by an organism called Phytophthora infestans. It's not technically a fungus, so it's an Umacida water mold, but the gardening world calls it a fungus, and so will I, just to keep things simple. Here's how it works. The blight reproduces by releasing what are called zoospores, tiny little swimming spores. They land on a tomato leaf and they need one specific condition to germinate and infect the plant. They need that leaf to stay wet for about 4 to 6 hours straight. That's the window. 4 to 6 hours of continuous leaf moisture and the spore breaks open, sends a germ tube into the leaf tissue, and within 48 to 72 hours you've got the brown lesion, the yellow halo, and a fresh batch of spores ready to release into the next rainstorm. That's why blight explodes during humid weeks. Every overnight dew is a 4 to 6 hour wet window. Now here's where the peroxide does its work. Hydrogen peroxide, when it hits a spore, floods the spore's cell membrane with what chemists call reactive oxygen species. In plain English, anula, it tears the spore apart from the inside with raw oxygen. The spore has no defense against that. It can't neutralize it. It can't pump it out. It dies on contact, usually within seconds of the spray hitting it. Daniel told me one afternoon, sitting on his porch with a cup of coffee, it's strong enough for the spore, gentle enough for the leaf. That's the whole mechanism in one sentence, because here's the part that's almost miraculous, and it's the part that took me a while to understand. The tomato plant itself, the leaf tissue, the stem, the green fruit, all of it, produces an enzyme called catalase. Every plant does, and catalase has exactly one job. It breaks hydrogen peroxide down into water and oxygen within seconds. So when you spray the diluted peroxide onto a tomato leaf, the spores on the surface get torn apart, and the leaf tissue underneath neutralizes the peroxide back into harmless water and a puff of oxygen before any damage can be done to the plant. The spore has no catalyst. The plant has plenty. That's the whole trick. That's why the dilution works. That's why 3% doesn't burn your tomatoes the way a stronger oxidizer would. I asked Daniel once whether his father had explained this to him in those terms: reactive oxygen species, catalase enzymes, and he just laughed. He said his father told him the bubbles eat the sickness and the leaf drinks the rest. Same idea, different language. Daniel's father didn't need a biochemistry textbook. He needed 50 years of watching what worked, and that's exactly the kind of mechanism the Extension Service can't teach you. Not because they don't know it. Most plant pathologists at the land-grant universities know this perfectly well, and there's a 2011 paper in the journal Crop Protection that lays it out in detail. They can't teach it because the moment a state agent explains the mechanism in the context of recommending a treatment, they have stepped past what the registration system permits. So the mechanism stays in the journal stays in the library, the gardener stays in the dark. And meanwhile, Daniel mixes his bottle on a Tuesday morning the way his father mixed it and the way his father's father mixed it before that. So let me walk you through how Daniel actually uses the bottle, because the recipe is the easy part. The protocol is what separates a gardener who tries this once and shrugs from a gardener who walks through 21 straight blight years untouched. Daniel sprays on a schedule, not on a panic. From the day his first tomato fruit sets, usually around the 3rd week of June on his place, he goes out every 10 to 14 days with the hand sprayer and coats every plant. He doesn't wait for symptoms. He doesn't wait for his neighbor's garden to fall apart. He sprays as a preventative, the same way you'd brush your teeth before you have a cavity, not after. Then he layers 2 more triggers on top of the schedule. Trigger 1, anytime a heavy rain rolls through during a humid week, he sprays after it. Trigger 2, the moment he sees the first brown lesion or the first yellow halo on any leaf in the garden, he sprays within 24 hours, the entire bed, every plant, top to bottom, and he sprays at specific times of day. Early morning, just after the dew burns off, or late evening after the sun is low, never midday. Daniel told me once, "Bill, the sun cooks the peroxide off before it ever finds the spore." He was right. I tried spraying at noon one August out of pure laziness and watched the spray evaporate off the leaves in about 90 seconds. Useless. Now here's what 21 consecutive seasons of doing it Daniel's way looks like on my own ground. Since the summer Daniel handed me that brown bottle in 2004, I have not lost a single tomato crop to blight. Not one. That includes the 2009 Northeast outbreak, the one that wiped commercial fields across Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey. crazy. The one that made the front page of the farm papers, the one that had extension offices fielding panicked calls all summer. My garden was untouched. Daniel's garden was untouched. The Amish farms up and down our road were untouched, and not because we got lucky with the wind, because we sprayed the brown bottle on a schedule. The yield numbers tell the same story. In the years before Daniel, my best tomato plants gave me 8 to 12 pounds each, and that was a good year. Most years it was less because Blight or Septoria or some other leaf killer would shut the plant down by mid-August. In the bed I'm pulling from right now, I'm getting 38 to 52 pounds per plant. Same dirt, same varieties, same Lancaster County humidity. The only difference is the brown bottle and the routine, and that's the kind of result the extension office is not allowed to put a name on because the substance that produced it doesn't carry the right label. All right, let's keep going because there's one more layer to this, and it's the layer that catches even gardeners who have heard of the hydrogen peroxide trick. This is the timing rule that took me about 3 seasons to fully understand because Daniel hinted at it but didn't spell it out until I asked him directly. Daniel's rule is this: never spray when the leaves are already wet. Never. The peroxide gets diluted past its kill threshold the second it hits a wet surface. You can have the right concentration in the bottle. You can have the right time of day. You can have the right schedule. If the leaves are still beaded with rain, you've just sprayed expensive water. The spore wins. So the trigger isn't the rain came. The trigger is the rain came and the leaves are now drying. That's a different moment. Daniel calls it the 2-hour window. Roughly 2 hours after a hard rain stops, the leaves are damp but no longer beaded with cheap. The surface is moist enough that the peroxide spreads beautifully and clings, but dry enough that it isn't getting watered down on contact. That's the optimal application moment, and most gardeners miss it by either spraying too early in the wet or waiting until the leaves are bone dry the next morning, by which point the spores have had their 4 to 6 hour germination window and the damage is already done. The 2-hour window is where the kill happens, and nobody at the county extension office is allowed to put that detail in a printed handout because the handout would be recommending an unregistered fungicidal use of a substance the EPA has not labeled for the crop. The other detail Daniel taught me, and this one I'd never have figured out on my own, is the spray pattern. Most folks spray the tops of the leaves because that's what's facing them. Daniel sprays the undersides first. He gets down low, tilts the wand up, and works his way across the bed, coating the underside of every leaf he can reach before he ever touches the top. The reason is biology. The stomata, the little pores the plant breathes through, are densely packed on the underside of a tomato leaf. That's also where the blight enters. Spores land on the top, get rinsed by rain, or pushed by wind to the underside and germinate into the stomata. If you spray only the tops, you've protected the side of the leaf the spores are using as a doormat. If you spray the undersides first, you've put the kill layer where the infection actually happens. That's the kind of detail that took someone 50 years of watching to understand, and it's the kind of detail that nobody at a county office is ever going to write down for you because the whole conversation is happening in a regulatory gray zone where the agent legally cannot have it. Now, if what I'm walking you through here is making sense and you're starting to see how Daniel's whole approach is layered, spray on top, soil underneath, plant defending itself from the inside, I want to point you to the foundation of all of this. The brown bottle is one tool, but the real reason it works as well as it does on Daniel's place and on mine is that the soil underneath these plants has been built for 20 plus years to grow tomato tissue that is naturally more resistant to disease in the first place. That's chapter 4 of my book, Building Pest-Proof Soil. It's the chapter that makes everything else in this video work twice as well, because a healthy plant grown in living soil shrugs off pressure that a stressed plant in dead dirt cannot. The book is called The 30-Day Amish Pest-Proof Garden Protocol. It's $17 at backyardbillbooks.com. If you're watching on your TV right now, point your phone camera at the QR code on screen. If you're on your phone or laptop, the link is in the description below. Take a second. Go grab your phone if you need to. I'll wait. No rush at all. Pull it up when you're ready, and I'll be right here. If you've been tired of fighting the same problem every single season, chapter 4 is where the foundation starts. All right, let's get into the part of this story that I think actually matters most, the why. Because once you understand why this knowledge was buried, you understand why it's going to stay buried unless gardeners like you and me pass it from one back fence to the next. The U.S. fungicide market for tomato disease control is worth roughly $400 million a year. That's chlorothalonil, mancozeb, copper-based products, and a small handful of newer systemic fungicides. Real money, real shelf space, real marketing budgets. To put a new fungicide on those shelves with an EPA registration label, a manufacturer is looking at $5 to $15 million in cost and somewhere between 5 and 10 years of regulatory work. That investment makes sense if you can patent the molecule and recoup the cost over 20 years of exclusive sales. Hydrogen peroxide cannot be patented. Nobody owns it. Anyone can sell it. So no company on earth has a financial reason to spend $10 million walking it through EPA registration as a tomato fungicide. Because the second they did, every competitor would sell the same product for $1 a quart. The result is that the substance exists in regulatory limbo. Perfectly legal to buy, perfectly legal to sell, completely illegal for a state extension agent to recommend. Now, I want to be straight with you. The registration system exists for legitimate reasons. It keeps genuinely dangerous compounds off the shelf. It makes sure that when a label says apply at this rate, that rate has been tested. I'm not going to dismiss that. There's a real public safety logic underneath it. But the unintended consequence is that effective, cheap, low toxicity solutions get filtered out of the official conversation alongside the dangerous ones because nobody can afford to walk them through the system. The filter doesn't sort by safe or effective. It sorts by who can pay the registration fee. And a substance that costs $1 a quart and works in hours has nobody in the boardroom willing to write that check. So here's what that has cost you, the gardener. Every season you have spent $50, $100, $200 on copper sprays, on store-bought fungicides, on the next product the garden center pushed at you in May. You have been paying that money because the cheap answer was buried by a structure that has no mechanism to surface it. That's not malice. Nobody at the EPA is sitting in a room laughing about your tomatoes. It's structure, it's economics, and the result is the same as if it had been malice. 21 years now since Daniel handed me the brown bottle in the summer of 2004. I have not lost a single tomato crop to blight. 21 consecutive seasons. The cheapest answer was the right answer. It was just sitting on a shelf nobody was allowed to point to. Now stick with me, because here's the second ingredient I promised you at the start. About a year after Daniel handed me that brown bottle, I was over at his place one afternoon and I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The bottle had a faint, cloudy residue settled at the bottom, almost like a fine white powder that had given up and sunk to the bottom of the liquid. I asked him what it was. He walked over to the same shelf, reached behind the peroxide and pulled down a generic store-brand bottle of plain uncoated aspirin. 325 milligrams, the cheapest one the drugstore sold. He held it up like it was nothing and he said, 1 tablet per gallon, Bill, crushed up fine. The peroxide kills the spore on the leaf. The aspirin tells the plant to defend itself from the inside. I'm going to translate what he was describing because the science is real and it's worth understanding. Aspirin is acetyl salicylic acid. Once it dissolves, it breaks down into salicylic acid. And salicylic acid is not some foreign chemical to a tomato plant. The plant makes it itself in tiny amounts whenever it gets attacked by a pathogen. It's one of the plant's own internal alarm signals. When you spray salicylic acid onto the leaves at a slightly higher dose than the plant can produce on its own, you trigger what the plant scientists call systemic acquired resistance, Sahera for short. Within 48 to 72 hours of foliar application, the tomato upregulates a whole family of pathogenesis-related proteins across every leaf, every stem, every fruit on the plant, not just where the spray landed. Every cell goes on alert. So now you've got 2 layers working at once. The peroxide oxidizes the spores on the leaf surface. The aspirin tells the plant to harden its defenses from the roots up. The dose is exact. 1 uncoated 325 milligram tablet per gallon of mix, not enteric coated, not buffered. The coating on those won't dissolve in cold water and you'll just be filtering a tablet through your sprayer screen. Crush it fine, stir it in, spray every 10 to 14 days through humid weather. Here's what gets me. The SR research has been published in peer-reviewed plant science journals since the early 1990s. 30 years of documented evidence, and the protocol, like the crushed aspirin in a foliar spray for tomato disease, has never appeared in a single state extension publication on blight. Not one. Daniel didn't read those papers. He learned the trick from his father, who learned it from a German language farming almanac the family carried over from Switzerland in the 1870s. 150 years that recipe has been quietly working in plain country, and the people whose job it is to advise American gardeners are not allowed to mention it. Before I let you go, I want to come back to one more thing. What I just walked you through is the blight protocol, but blight is one tomato problem out of half a dozen. Hornworms, aphids, whiteflies, early blight septoria, and every one of them has has the same kind of layered Amish answer behind it. That's exactly what Chapter 8 of my book covers, Crop by Crop Pest Solutions. It's called the 30-Day Amish Pest-Proof Garden Protocol, and it's everything I've learned from my Amish neighbors over the last 3 decades, organized into a simple day-by-day plan you can start this season. It covers the full 5 defense layers to build a garden that defends itself from the soil up. It's got the complete 4-bed crop rotation system that stops disease and pests before they ever get a foothold. And it includes the companion planting field guide, so you know exactly what to grow next to what and why. Now, there are 2 easy ways to grab it. The first way is to click the link in the description right below this video. Just scroll down a little and you'll see it. The second way, if you're watching on a television or a computer screen, is to take out your phone, open up your camera like you're going to take a picture, and hold it up to the QR code you see on screen right now. A little link will pop up at the top of your phone screen. Just tap that and it'll bring you right to the guide. No typing, no searching. Either way works. I think it's the best investment you can make in your garden this year. 3% hydrogen peroxide and 1 crushed uncoated aspirin tablet in a hand sprayer. What old order Amish farmers in Lancaster County have used for generations to walk through blight years untouched while everyone around them watched their crops collapse. Now you have what 21 state extension offices are not allowed to put in a printed handout. Daniel is mixing his bottle right now on the same shelf where his father mixed it before him, the way it has been done quietly in this county for longer than my grandfather has been alive. Try it on a single bed this season, 1 row, mix the bottle, follow the 2-hour window after the rain, spray the underside of the leaves first and watch what happens. Come back here in September and drop a note in the comments. I want to hear how it went for you. And if you like this one, the next thing I'd point you toward is the Amish potato method. Daniel pulls 100 pounds of potatoes out of a 4-foot by 4-foot patch every single fall. And once you see how he does it, you'll never plant potatoes the old way again. I'll see you in the next one.